Time to put those strange oval balls away. The winter has come and gone. The sun is starting to shine. It's A-League time. We're now just 2 weeks away from the start of the season, and whilst the teams have been hard at work in their pre-season efforts, so have we. Tonight, the first part of our A-League men's season preview. 3 teams off the bat, the Phoenix, Adelaide United and the Bulls. We'll take you through the ins and outs, the on-field and the off, the reasons for optimism and the causes for doubt. We're spreading them over all 4 episodes left to go until the start of the season, so stay tuned to your podcast applications to hear our preview for your team. Stick with us through that, and then we'll chat Tony Popovich's first squad as manager of the Socceroos, and Melbourne City getting off to a winning start in the first edition of the AFC Women's Champions League on this episode of the Roundball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me tonight is Jacob Stevens. Jacob, I'm a little bit worried it'll be our first Adelaide United rant of the season. I'm looking forward to what you have in store.
Well, I would be as well, because look, I'll give you a little bit of a teaser, but it's not, completely hopeless, and I'm not, I'm not as pessimistic as usual. I think there are a couple of things to certainly look forward to. So, just stay tuned for that.
Well, what is a new season for, if not for, optimism, right? In a new season campaign. So.
New season, new me.
Yes, absolutely. I love that attitude from you. Hello, Poletti, as well, joining us today. I think we're getting a rant from you today as well.
I think I've got a couple of things to rant about, but you know what? With the new A-League men's season on the horizon, I'm also going to try and be as optimistic as I can, and I'm just very glad that given the current Australian sporting landscape is that we no longer have to bunker down about critical VAR decisions, because for once, VAR is not the talk of the sporting world, thankfully. Following last night's NRL men's grand final.
Now, Christian Montegan, being a Victorian like me, I'm sure you're not a familiar viewer of the NRL, but I did watch the grand final on Sunday night. I have it as no try. I thought Munster, whatever he was, whoever the guy was, I can't remember. I thought he got his arm under the ball. I thought no try, but everyone seems to think it was.
That was my first interpretation when I saw it live. I thought it was very difficult, obviously, to see firsthand, but my first reaction was that the arm was underneath and the ball didn't touch the ground. And then as the replay showed, I think one of the commentators said, "Oh, that's a definite try." I'm like, where are you seeing this? I don't think it's that definite as people are making it out to be on social media. But anyway, this is an NRL podcast. We'll save it for another day.
Sorry, I did say we were going to put the oval balls away.
I know, you brought it back in.
Anyway, I thought
the toy one last time before you put it away for the next 6 months.
I thought we'd complain about a different codes, video referee system, just so we know that it's not a unique issue to football, and we can come in, as Jacob says, new season, new podcast, a little bit of optimism. Aussie football needs a little bit of optimism from time to time, so let's go in with that. It is going to be Adelaide MacArthur, but we're going to kick things off with Wellington tonight, and I'm going to take the lead on this one. The Wellington Phoenix, under manager Giancarlo Italiano last season, absolutely amazing. They really stunned the league, to be honest, with what they could do. No one really expected them to do a whole lot. Very famously, one person predicted they would come bottom of the table, and it turns out the Phoenix had used that as a little bit of motivation to prove them wrong. Look, it's whenever a team has success in the A-League, particularly some of these smaller budget teams, whenever you do well, particularly in this climate where there's lots of international attention on the league, probably unlike in the last, looking before 3 years ago or so, there's a lot more attention now. So whenever you have success like the Mariners, like Wellington have last year, you're going to get clubs looking at your players. So they've lost the likes of Ben Old, Alex Paulson, Finn Sermon are the 3 under-23 players that were really pivotal to their campaign last year. So that will hurt, particularly Paulson going to Auckland, as we know. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But I think there's still so many reasons for optimism in this Wellington team this year. I think a lot of that has to come down to Italiano himself. I think he's a really superb coach. He's a pragmatist. He set up his team last year to the best effect that he thought he could get out of that playing squad. And he talked openly about wanting to improve the style. Some of these good players leaving, has opened the door to bring in players that suit more of his vision of football. So a lot of them will come in unproven. Obviously, you have Paulo Retre and Marco Rojas, who do know the league very well. And of course, they've gone on and they've both won championships, done great things in the league. So you've got experience there. You've got a lot of scholarship players that have been signed into the first team. And then you've got a couple of very interesting visa signings as well. You've got a new goalkeeper, a new young goalkeeper, 23-year-old goalkeeper Joshua Oluwayemi, who, they went international for a goalkeeper because Italiano said that if they didn't find the mould of keeper that they wanted domestically, they would go overseas. I'm sure he's very good with his feet. That seems to be the number one thing that coaches want in keepers these days. And then this Japanese pair as well, Kazuki Nakasawa and Hideki Ishige, particularly the latter, but both of them can play absolutely all over the field as well. So Italiano has these profiles of players that can play multiple positions. We know he likes to be very versatile in how he sets up. It seems that will be doubled down upon this year. So, look, I think they have lost some quality players, as all good teams do in the A-League. But I think their real asset is their coach. And with another full preseason and a squad slightly more suited to how he wants to play football, I think Wellington Phoenix are in a good position, Poletti.
I think that it's going to be an exciting time. I think that after the highs of last season, which ended in lows about half an hour later, that fans will have that new optimism. I think that it should lead to higher crowd numbers on average than what we've seen previously, because a lot of people might now have finally take the chance to get behind the Knicks and go, okay, something special is clearly building here. And I know it's in New Zealand, but the old Australian adage is that everyone loves a winner and crowds go up when teams are winning. Well, that's exactly what the Knicks are doing, and I can't imagine it would be too much different across the Dutch to see. Sorry, New Zealand listeners.
Terrible accent. Terrible.
Oh, it absolutely is. I'm gonna get roasted for that. To see crowd numbers increase. So I'm very excited for the Knicks this season.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because they did have good crowds last season as well. I think they averaged just a hint over 10,000 per game, which is extremely good for a Wellington side. But an interesting part of that attendance figure is that they actually got some very, very big crowds when they played in Auckland. So It's going to be really interesting to see, not number one, the kind of numbers that they do get for these Kiwi Classicos, what the crowd numbers look like. On the surface of it probably could be more when they play in Auckland, because you have some established Phoenix supporters plus this new wave from the Black Knights. But also what the makeup of that crowd will be. Have you got a lot of potentially Auckland people that have followed the Wellington Phoenix just as the one club team in New Zealand? Have you got a lot of locals who just refuse because Wellington's the enemy? I don't know really what the culture's like over there. But Christian, it's going to be really interesting to see how this rivalry develops, because this isn't just like a flash in the pan thing. This is now one against the other, the two professional teams in New Zealand. You're going to be competing for fan favour. You're going to be competing for the young Kiwi talent coming through your doors in your academy. And don't forget as well, we're still fighting to become the first New Zealand team to win the A-League as well.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because about 10 years or so ago, we had this conversation about, in the mainstream media about Wellington are at risk of going under or, scrapped from the league, because I think there were conversations around, ages ago, years ago. And, did they fit into the A-League financially? Were they stable enough to continue? And then they renewed their license. And then from there, I think they've just gone from the up. And to have this rivalry with Auckland, beginning this season, I think the city needs this. Wellington, New Zealand, this is a rivalry that will definitely, do a world of good, both, for the A-League, Wellington and Auckland in general, because I feel as though, it's sort of bubbling beneath the surface. Like you said, we don't know really what to expect in terms of the atmosphere or, geographics, or, will some Wellington supporters go over to Auckland to support them because they're a new club? We saw that with the Victory City. When the new Melbourne Heart expansion came in, we saw some Victory supporters jump ship to Melbourne Heart. So we could see a bit of that play out. From that stance, it's just a bit of a wait and see. But in terms of the derbies, I'm looking forward to them because they should be, really epic in terms of the atmosphere. If the semi-final against Victory was anything to go by, that was a non-derby. If we get that kind of atmosphere, for Wellington v Auckland, it's just going to be insane. I can't wait for it.
It should be quite the clash, shouldn't it?
Nice, well done, well played. No, that's one for the real hardcore listeners right there.
Yeah,
You got that, we're impressed. Look, you're right. A new derby, Jacob, to the A-League. We're going to get 3 Classicos, Poletti, Classicos this year. However popular or unpopular the name is. It'll be interesting to see what the players think of it because, you know, you can put 2 teams close to each other. You can make up the name for the rivalry. But in the end, any good footballing rivalry earns its teeth on the park itself. So it'll be fascinating to see how much the players buy into it.
I think that at least on Auckland's side, it would be silly for them to not be, you know, really engaging with the idea of this becoming the next big thing in the A-League and, you know, really trying to stoke the fires of this rivalry because they've got nothing to lose from it really, right? And a lot to benefit from if they can get this sort of big rivalry game every year with the Knicks. And even if it's still, you know, it's not as, you know, heated and there's, you know, not as much hatred and just general not aggression, that's a bad word, but you know what I mean, like between the fan bases, even if it's a bit more civil and it's a bit more friendly and it's more that sort of banter sibling rivalry type thing, I think even that would still be fantastic to see. And you know, it's a case of even then, you know, yeah, I hate you because you're next door, but we're still representing the same country in another country's competition, you know, so when you're playing against one of the Aussie teams, we want you to beat them anyway because we want to show that New Zealand's better, sort of thing. You know, even if that's the case, I think it would be great. But no, you're right about players, how they're going to approach it. I mean, Auckland have a couple of New Zealand-based players who have played in New Zealand their whole life, in like those lower leagues, not at the A-League level, so that's another thing. But for Wellington, they should be, I think, looking at the squad that Auckland have put together, they should almost sort of feel a little bit threatened. You know, obviously they've lost Paulson to these new rivals. There are a few decent signings for Auckland as well, and they look to be a solid squad. So it could be a case of, even though Italiano has shown how capable he is as a coach, and a lot of these sort of core squad that the Phoenix has shown what they can do at the A-League level, they've now got a direct challenger in the same, you know, geographical location, you know, who have taken one of their best players from last season. Like it's gonna be fantastic to watch. I agree with everything everyone said so far. And one thing I'm actually going to be really interested to see from the Phoenix is, does Italiano make any real adjustments to what he was doing last season? Because we know that it was a successful formula, but he's lost a lot of the players that did help make that happen. And when that happens, you either have to, as a coach, and you've got to make this decision early on in the off-season, you've got to either go, right, we're sticking with it, even if the players, you know, we've lost a couple of those key players and we need to bring other people in, we're going to stick with what we were doing because it works, or you go, we're going to change things up, perhaps a bit more flexible and a bit more versatile and bring in players who fit that. And I think that's what we've seen is a slight move. And I think Italiano did make some comments a while ago as well, saying, look, it's not going to look exactly the same, you know, sort of the way that we play. But in a way, I think what he's done is actually, and you mentioned this in your opening statement, Lockie, is that he's brought in these players who sort of fit that flexibility that he likes to have, where he can make adjustments during a game because he's got players who can play all across the park. And, you know, we've seen many a team over the years try and play players out of position in these newer areas to try and just bring a bit of depth, a bit of difference making quality in those areas of the park. And that's what Italiano now has with some of his signings. So I think from a tactical standpoint, the Phoenix are probably one of the most interesting ones because we don't know necessarily how they're going to look when they go out there on the pitch. Auckland are the same, but that's because we haven't seen them play a competitive fixture yet. But, you know, for the Phoenix, it could be a really big overhaul for them. And that's an exciting, but also a potentially dangerous thing for them, right? Because they were so good last year. If they change it up and it doesn't work, you know, what does that say? And you know, are the fans gonna, you know, be rightfully a bit annoyed that, hang on, why have you changed what was working when we came so close to winning it all last season?
Yeah, I do think the fans have a pretty good trust in Italiano and will allow him to do what he thinks, but also on like a spectrum of trying to impart too much change and then players not fully understanding a system and then going not enough and then still kind of sticking to those old, tactics and play style. I think Italiano probably leads towards the latter. He'll be a little bit conservative in that approach, and he'll use training time to develop his team slowly, but make sure they get it. And you're right, versatility is such a big thing. When they announced Hideki Ishige, they put out, I think it was the A-Leagues, they put out this graphic of like the different positions that he could play. And it was just everything except centre back and goalkeeper was lit up as like a spot that he could play on the ground. So it looks like we could see him absolutely everywhere.
But for much as we've talked about Italiano, it's, we've praised him so much and for good reason. He's got such a great story behind him. Lockie, you would have loved, writing up that preview piece. It would have been great fun. But it's just weird to think that this is only his second season in charge. Like it feels like he's been there for years because we praise him so highly. His tactical knowledge of the game. It feels like he's so experienced, but he's not. And then you've got Steve Corica on the other side of Auckland, who's been there, done that, won a championship multiple with Sydney FC. That's the fascinating contrast, I think, in this derby as well. And I also wanted to bring up on the field, obviously, Bozidar Krajev, he went to the Western Sydney Wanderers in the off-season. That's the one area where I'm not too sure if you want to add to this, Lockie. Have Wellington added in that area in terms of an attacking sort of threat in that final third, that playmaker, that creative play that can provide that spark, or is that something that Wellington haven't been able to replace in this off season?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer there is Marco Rojas, but it remains to be seen kind of in what method that Italiano chooses to use him. Obviously, a lot of their forward presence has been removed, so there's no Oscar Zavada, there's no Ben Old. They have re-signed Costa Barbarouses, which was great to do. Obviously, Bozidar Krajev as well. So, look, it's probably weaker players on paper. But again, I think just the team emphasis, and again, that's probably the wrong way to say it, but the emphasis that I place on Italiano as one of the biggest assets of Wellington kind of diminishes the importance of individual quality in players just a little bit. So I have more faith that he'll be able to put a system together that will suit the players he does have. So, last year, and Krajev was part of this as well, and so was Ben Old. He said that sitting back a little bit deeper and allowing for more counter attacks suited that style of play. But maybe if you don't have that really quick, incisive, creative influence, then maybe playing so quickly on the counter isn't what they want to do, and they want to take things a little bit slower and move the ball around a little bit and have higher possession counts. So, look, perhaps not. Perhaps they didn't match the quality 1-for-1 in terms of the players they brought in. But again, I do trust Italiano to be able to find a system that works for the players that he has. Finally, just in terms of expectations for the season as well and where they should finish, we're not going to tell you exactly where we're predicting these teams. We're going to save that for a YouTube video that we're going to put out in a week or so's time in the lead up to the opener on Friday night. But in terms of what their internal expectations should and will be, Italiano said in one of his first ever interviews that by his second season, he would like to be challenging for silverware. So they already did that last year. So I can't imagine any reason why that should change. They should be expected to be competing. Obviously, we've talked in the last few weeks about, the direction that the A-League is going and the fact that potentially clubs like Sydney FC, Melbourne Victory have really targeted this year as a time where they could double down on their squad and really, take a bit of the risk out and challenging for silverware. So I think top two is probably a tough ask. I would say top four probably a good pass mark for the Phoenix Poletti, and then, set yourselves up for a good finals run again.
It absolutely does, and I want to just touch on something you just said there. You said that Italiano said that his second year he wanted to be competing for silverware. It just reminded me of a quote: "Playoffs in 3, cup in 6." And just to further emphasise that Auckland Wellington connection, those were the words of Auckland FC owner Bill Foley ahead of the Vegas Golden Knights inaugural season. And in year 1, they went to the Cup final and lost to the Washington Capitals, but then got their Cup in year 6. So I'm saying if that's anything to go by, then I think we can put Wellington Phoenix down for silverware this year.
Christian, maybe if Italiano does go on to win something this year and eventually ends up in England, the journos might ask him if he always wins trophies in his second year. A big storm of controversy around it. But no, exciting year for the Phoenix. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to see what they come out with. Obviously, they got knocked out in the round of 32 with the Cup. It's always difficult for the Phoenix in pre-season playing the quality of opposition that they would want to. So, they will have been playing local teams, a couple of A-League friendlies, but round 1, it's going to.
Who have they got in the opening round? Sorry, Wellington.
That is Brilliant question, Christian.
Sorry, I was about to search it up, but
Let's have a look.
he's done the preview.
Western United at home. round
That's
one.
right. Yeah. That's
So-
that's a winnable game to start, and then
Absolutely.
we know it's all about. Well, the Central Coast will disagree. It's not all about good starts because they started 0-4 last season and they came back to win the championship. But for Wellington, I think with the players that they've had, missing in the off season and a relatively new squad, to get 3 points on the board early would be huge for them in their confidence.
All right, there you go. That's the Knicks for you. Jacob, we're going to head over to Adelaide United.
Yeah, and as I kind of alluded to in the introduction, it's not all doom and gloom here yet.
That's what you want to hear.
I'll add that little thing in. But no, I mean, look, I called them in my preview piece that I wrote for the Ramble Australia website. I called them the league's Jekyll and Hyde because it's a team where it seems like there's almost two juxtaposing identities to it. The board and the owners and the sort of the football operations side of things are treating the club like it's in rebuild mode. They came out at the members forum and they said, look, we're in year one of what we expect to be a 3 to 4 year rebuild. Like that's when the window is going to open up again for us to be able to compete for silverware. We missed our chance with the squad that we did have because players had left, that we weren't able to keep them around to keep that window open for a little bit longer and continue to invest in the squad. We're going to look to rebuild. But then you've got a squad that are bringing in these talented youngsters into the squad who are going to start getting good minutes, and that obviously fits with the whole rebuild thing of getting them ready in for a few years time. And they've handed out these 5-year contracts to Ethan Alagic and Panakikianis as well, identifying them as these key players for the future. But then you've also got things like bringing in Bart Vriends, who is the sort of player that fans were crying out for 2 or 3 years ago when Adelaide were arguably one of the top sides in the league, right? Consistently fighting in finals and getting deep. And it was 3 semi-finals in a row that the club made and just couldn't quite get over that penultimate hurdle. And it was a lot of the time it was a case of not having the defence required to be able to do that. And, Bart Vriends was a player that these fans would have loved back then, and now he's being brought in, and it sort of almost seems like, well, what's the point of bringing in a really talented veteran international defender into a team that's not going to be competing? You've got things like Colviert, he's on only 2 years left now on his contract, and little smirk there from Poletti because of a mistake that I did make, thinking he only had 1 year left on his contract.
No, it was actually because of something else, but go on.
Oh, okay.
Just take yourself out the dry.
Is it the fact that that there's going to be 2 years of me complaining about Colviert to look forward to?
Sure, let's go with that.
Yeah, let's go with that. No, so 2 years for Colviert, which, it doesn't really quite align with that rebuilding idea of a coach wants to have that comfort of knowing that they're going to be given that time, and his contract is ending before what the owners and the board are saying is going to be the time for competing. So it sort of seems like, well, what's the point of me doing all of this if I'm not going to be the one that's going to get the rewards for it, sort of thing. It's actually something that was in Moneyball, if you've seen that movie. Yeah. Great film, where Art Howe, the manager of the Oakland Athletics at the time, was like, it's really difficult to sort of buy into this new project when I've got a year left, or however long it was left on my contract, because I'm not necessarily going to be there to benefit from it when it comes to fruition. So is it the same sort of thing here? But then the team goes out and they're past their competitive window and yet almost make the cup final, right? It's just, it seems like there's these two different things that are fighting at each other. Obviously, players want to win. They're always going to be in win now mode. A coach is always going to want to win, and especially a coach nearing the end of his contract is going to want to win. And Carl Viet as well has never won silverware for Adelaide United. He has been the club's longest serving head coach and not won a single thing. He has fallen at that penultimate hurdle at the semi-final in the cup and in the league 4 times now. Has not even made the final once. He is going to want to win something so badly, and yet to then have the club be saying no, we're not going to be competing. It just feels like there's this ebbing and flowing, and these two opposite forces pulling away at each other, and it makes it difficult to establish where the club really is. And it was sort of similar last year, but that was because the team just couldn't find their form. This year, it's because there's two different directions that it seems like the club is going in. On the pitch, it's going in, we want to win. Off the pitch, it's going in, we're in rebuild. So it's sort of a bit weird. That's why I called it a Jekyll and Hyde situation. These two identities, these two personalities. But I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Definitely not on the pitch. Look, defensive depth is still a big issue, and there's really a lack of quality there. But, Bart Vriends is a fantastic signing who I think could become, one of the best defenders in the league, provided he manages to get over the injury that he's currently got and actually gets some minutes into the legs. There's obviously very exciting attacking prospects that the club has. The midfield is one of arguably the best midfield units in the league with just the quality of depth that the club has. And while Carl Viet perhaps tactically isn't as exciting as some of the coaches in the league are starting to become, he manages to find a way to get things done. He's finished in the finals all but I think 2 seasons that he's been at the helm, and one of those was the half season where Verbeek was sacked midway through the year, and Viet stepped in as the interim, so you can't really put too much on that. So, on the pitch, I think that the club has the potential to cause a few issues for some of the stronger sides, and we saw that in the cup semi-final against Victory, a side that I think we're all in agreement looks very strong this season and could be easily one of the top 3 sides in the league. And Adelaide held them honest, and that was without a defender on the pitch, right? Like it's a case of, I think the club, that sort of shows where they can be, but are they going to be able to get there consistently? And especially with the lack of depth that the club has as well, I think that could be a big issue. So it's sort of all topsy-turvy at the moment for Adelaide, and it's going to take a few rounds, probably a few months, to figure out what exactly the team is doing. But here now, only a couple of weeks out from Adelaide's first game, at least, because they don't play until round 2, have the bye in round 1. It does seem like we can't quite place them, and say, yes, this is, this is how they're going to look sort of thing, like we can do with some of the other clubs, because there's just a whole lot of unknowns still.
When we look at how the A-League is treated in Australia and the state that different clubs are in, I think you can very often look to Adelaide United as a model of how we want to do things. They don't own their own stadium, right? But, they've just had this $50 million upgrade given to it. And there's this really intimate atmosphere. The facilities, in terms of the pitch, are now world class. They've got all these good things going for them. They've started handing out 5-year contracts, which we've never seen before in the A-League, to young up-and-coming talent. So they're getting their affairs in order to make sure when they create the next Nestor Irigoyen or a player of that reputation, you know what I mean, that they're in a position to negotiate well to sell them on. And, they've got this partnership with PSV, and I know you just talked about the dichotomy between on the field, off the field, and where we're going. But you have to say that Adelaide is set up, generally, their fundamentals for over a long period of time is served them very well. And they, as you say, they very rarely miss finals. And I think you wrote, when they do miss finals, usually it comes with a coaching change. Carl Viet managed to buck that trend last year. So they've got Carl Viet, who's worked in the academy previously and knows a lot of the players. I can't help but thinking that whilst, particular seasons may not go well, they might go up and down for Adelaide United, they seem to be set off extremely well on the field. They always give themselves a pretty good chance going into every season.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that Adelaide fans have become. And this is a Mike Tomlin quote, Steelers head coach in the NFL. He said that we want our fans to be, what was the term? Fat and...
where are you going with this?
Fat with expectations or something like that, right? Basically, this idea of them being spoiled because the team is consistently doing well, and I think that's sort of the case here in Adelaide, is that the fans expect this team to consistently be sort of almost perennial underdogs and competing and being up there in the top 6, the top 4, not necessarily winning things every year, because that's just not a reality for any club here in this country, but to consistently be competing for it at least. So I think it's sort of, it bucks the trend for the club to outwardly admit that we're not actually looking at competing. And it's a bit strange, but also have to admire the transparency on display there, because it was something that the club said last season. Look, we really value transparency and we want to be, having this open communication with and dialogue with the fans. And it perhaps wasn't quite there last season. There was a lot of silence from the football operations side of things. But already, to come out and say, look, don't necessarily get your hopes up because we're not thinking we're going to compete. You've got to respect the honesty there, right? And I think the fans have generally received it pretty well, because it's a case of, well, at least we're not being left out in the dark sort of thing, But you're right that Adelaide, I'd still, look, I've not set exact expectations for them, but in a league where almost half the teams managed to make the finals, I think Adelaide has the chance to still scrape in. Like I said, when they are on top form, as they were against the Victory, and you think they could probably even go further than that with some of those defensive starters in the side, there is every reason that the club could make the finals. And I think that while the board is expecting the club to sort of be on a bit of a downward turn and perhaps not as strong as the last few seasons have been, fans can still expect them to compete, because that's just how things are done here. It's how they will continue to be done. I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 wooden spoon seasons for the club. It's not something that happens very often. Even in bad years, they're still there or thereabouts in that sort of 6th to 8th range, an outside shot for finals. And even last season, it wasn't until about 3 rounds to go that they were mathematically out of finals. So no, you're right and exactly spot on there, Lockie, that Adelaide have managed to find something that works, while the Mariners have sort of become the model that the other clubs are starting to replicate now, in terms of how do we dig ourselves out of a hole, sort of this period of uninspiring performances and then able to turn that around. Adelaide, I think, are the model for how a club is to be sustainable going forwards, in terms of from day dot until now, they have been one of the better sides in the league. I think statistically are the 4th best team in the league or something like that as well. I think the A-League's put out a post on social media the other day with the total points table, and Adelaide are 4th there, I think. I think you're right. Adelaide know what they're doing. And I think it's good now that the fans know as well what the plan is, because this was something that even I mentioned on the podcast last season, was fans just don't know what's going on with the club. Where are they headed? What are the expectations? Now everybody knows. It's clear as day. It's also easy to set the bar low, right, and just go, we're rebuilding, because then if it all goes well, you can go, look at that, we outperformed expectations. But I do think it's realistic to say, yes, the club is in rebuild, but then, like you say, Lockie, there's no reason why that can't still translate to some semblance of success and at least being in the shout.
But just on that point, Jacob, obviously with the expectation side of it, do you feel as though it's a bit of a free hit this season, where you're not expecting finals, but to Lockie's point, it feels like Adelaide have this great culture about them, where you feel there is something there, like there is something in the club, as hard it is, I think, for you now to find something within yourself to admit it. But I feel, just in terms of like the talent coming through, and obviously, the youth development, the 5-year contracts, all of this sort of stuff. So, 2 questions. One, do you feel, will that be a benefit for Adelaide going into the new season with that less pressure and expectation on their shoulders? And number 2, who are a couple of young players that stand out to you, who could maybe become not the next Iran Kunda? I don't want to put too high expectations, but someone who can really burst onto the scene.
So to your first point there, I think spot on, that this sort of lack of pressure, and I think last season as well, almost sort of playing with this idea of being Iran Kunda's team and, the expectations that come with that. And obviously it put a lot individually on Iran Kunda himself, but I think the team suffered a lot from it too, because it became a case of, we are the Iran Kunda team rather than we are Adelaide United, if that makes sense. And I think that sort of breaking free from that could be a good thing. And it is a club that it seems to be, and this was something I wrote in the season preview for last season, was that it had lost its identity, and I think is starting to find that now, with sort of this reversion to these classic Adelaide United teams of a bunch of local players and kids who aren't quite there yet, right? Like, it's not like last season where you had Aaron Kundu, who was by far and away one of the best players in the league. It's a case of they're in these years of development now, but they've also gone and done things that are classically Adelaide, like bringing in a really good veteran foreign signing. Even if it's only the one, it's still sort of in that model of Adelaide managed to do that a lot throughout their history of bringing in one good foreign signing. They might not have, 4 or 5 of them like Sydney have managed to do this season, but there's usually one there or thereabouts, and that hasn't necessarily been the case for quite a few years. I think Isaias obviously is sort of on that downward part of his career trajectory now, and Javi Lopez hasn't looked great for the last couple of seasons, so it's sort of been lacking that international presence that I'm expecting Bart Vriends to be able to have. So yeah, no, it does feel like Adelaide United are sort of back to their roots in a way, which is cool. And part of that is, you mentioned who are these young players to look out for. Young players are a big part of that. And one that immediately comes to my mind, and he might not get many minutes, but I find an incredibly exciting prospect, is Fabian Taladera, who has lit up the NPLSA for the Adelaide United youth team. He's a left back and playing the midfield as well. Somebody who just has a little bit of that versatility we were talking about earlier with the Knicks, where teams are constantly looking for versatility. It's something that Carl Viet has always looked for in his players as well. He's known to chop and change things around and play players out of position to just see what works and try and bring something different to the game. And you get that with a player who can play in a couple of different positions. So he's somebody to keep an eye out for. Ryan White is another one. Up front for Adelaide, stocks are a bit thin. Austin Ayubi is obviously having a fantastic preseason and looks probably the bet to win the club's golden boot. But outside of that, you've got 2 sort of young, unproven strikers in Goodwin and Jovanovic. On the other wing, you've not really got a whole lot. You've got Dylan Piraeus and Panache Medania, but they've been played as fullbacks rather than as wingers. Zach Clough can play out wide, but he's better as the 10. So it's sort of this grey area for the club. And then you've got someone like Ryan White, who has come in the cup a couple of times for the club and looks really just dynamic and energetic, and he's got that explosiveness to him that has been lacking in the middle for Adelaide for a little bit. Obviously with Hiroshi Ibasuki, he's a different type of striker. He's a bit slower, taller, sort of target man player, whereas Ryan White really likes to get involved with the play. He's like Stefan Mork in that sense, right? We know that Mork is constantly moving about. He's a bit aggravating and a bit annoying if you're on the receiving end of it. I think I've seen a little bit of that from Ryan White as well. And then the final one to touch on, who I would be remiss not to talk about, that it seems to be on everybody's lips at the moment, is Amlani Tatu, who people obviously comparing him to Nestor Irankunda, which, look, let's not go there yet. let's see how he goes. But there's sort of that similar trajectory to him where he's just really exploded onto the scene. And even, Nestor has spoken highly about him as well. And they're by all accounts, good friends that played a bit together. And yeah, he's this young, explosive winger. He actually, in comparison to Irankunda, looks a bit more composed on the ball, where Irankunda was this explosive, streaky player where you knew he could just flip a switch and have that one moment that could change a game. Tatu looks like he's going to be more involved for longer periods of the game. He's a bit more fluid in that sense. So while, they look quite similar in terms of, stature and on the ball, the actual way that they play is slightly different. Doesn't mean that he's any less of a threat or will be any less of a threat, but it's just a slightly different play style, which is why it's kind of funny, at least for Adelaide people, to be hearing these comparisons to Irankunda, knowing that they're actually very different types of players. But yeah, he's definitely one to keep an eye out for. And as I already mentioned, that right wing spot, sort of a bit of a black hole for the club, and it's not absolutely certain who's going to be playing there. So I can see him getting a lot of minutes and a big chance to really sort of find some form and stamp his name.
On Bart Vriends as well, I was listening to Ben Garuccio and Stefan Mork on their podcast, Football Friends, today, and Steph was saying that he's good to go and that they wanted to be cautious with him fitness-wise. He potentially could have played in the Cup, but they decided to take it easy with him, and so he should be good for round 1. So that's good as well, because you desperately need that experience there, and having him in there for round 1 will set the tone for the year, which will be good for the Reds.
it'll take a bit of the pressure off of Kikianis as well.
Yeah.
Just to interrupt you there, but yeah, he's obviously still very young and relatively inexperienced at this level of football, and to have been given this 5-year contract and to expect to be part of, the backbone of the squad moving forwards, has a lot of pressure on young shoulders, and especially defensively for a club that hasn't been great defensively, there's even more pressure there. So to have someone like Bart Vreens alongside you would definitely be a massive help. And look, I'm really excited by Vreens. I think he's going to be a fantastic player. It's the depth in defence that's the issue rather than the starting quality. But no, yeah, I think alongside just being a quality individual player, he's going to help Kikianis and his development as well, which is going to be huge for the club.
All right, that'll do for the Reds. Thank you, Jacob. The third and final club for tonight's Poletti is MacArthur FC, the Bulls.
Have I been left any time to talk about MacArthur at all?
Look, I'll admit, it went a little. The Adelaide United went a little bit over expectations, but A-League fans are hardcore.
It deserves it.
It deserves it.
I mean, Jacob goes into such high quality and in-depth analysis that it would have been a crime to cut him off. Speaking of crimes, that is going to be one of the big stories this season. Sorry, that was not a planned transition, by the way.
What a segue.
If that was on the spot, that's super impressive.
Well done.
It was on the spot. But that is going to be the big off-field drama this season. Looking at MacArthur, is the alleged criminal and spot-fixing misconduct of Ulysses Davia, Clayton Lewis, and I've forgotten who the third player is that was involved.
Bacchus.
Yes. Who, Davia is no longer at the club, Bacchus is no longer at the club, Clayton Lewis is still under no-fault stand down by Football Australia. So, that's going to be a big off-field storyline, because any time there's any sort of development in that case, it's going to get brought up in the media. People are going to ask about it, and so if the club can shut that down, can just sort of be like, no, we're not going to let it distract us. It's an off-field issue. Just sort of just don't let it impact them within the camp. Then that's probably the easiest way to deal with it, because it will be asked and it will be a distraction. But in terms of the on-the-pitch stuff, they've just won another trophy. You've got the second Australia Cup in 3 years, although the last time they won the Cup, the coach was gone 4 months later. So I think MacArthur will be pretty keen to avoid that happening again. But, I mean, Milo Stovsky is a very good coach, very reserved personality, tends not to express a lot of emotion, both on the sideline and in press conferences. He's well liked at the club. Everyone I speak to, raves about him. They absolutely love what he's doing there. So I don't think he'll be under any sort of pressure, even if MacArthur get off to a poor start. In terms of their expectations, I think the where I would put it is that winning a finals game is a pass mark. They did it against the Mariners in their first season, I want to say off the top of my head. They made the finals last season, 4-0 loss to Sydney FC. And the second time they've made the league finals. But I think the way Stovsky has this side playing, making the finals, I don't want to say it's a given, but that's sort of like the pass mark. Then the pass mark is winning a finals game. It's going to show continued development, and that this squad's heading in the right direction. I think they've made some very smart signings to deal with a lot of these departures. You've got Marin Yaklish coming in, Chris Economides, who we've yet to see play a game for MacArthur. You've got Harry Sawyer, who absolutely lit NPL Victoria on fire this season in his return to South Melbourne. You got Luke Bratton, who's driving the midfield in a different way than what Davia did, but a lot of the traffic in the midfield is still going to run through Luke Bratton this season. And when it's not running through Bratton, it'll probably run through Jake Holman. Breakout year last season. I'll be very keen to see how his progression continues, and whether or not a club does come calling for him throughout the season in terms of a transfer, or whether maybe that is a little bit of a step too far for Holman, and that comes in the off-season. But if that happens, it would be a huge loss for them. But Bratton would certainly be there to pick up the workload. Overall, I'm just very, very excited to see how this side continues to develop. I think we'll see a lot of different styles played this year, both tactically and with personnel, formation-wise, and how that all balances out. I think it's going to be a very interesting season to watch MacArthur this year.
At risk of doubling up on the pop culture references, for me, this MacArthur screams Moneyball. You look at the players they picked up. Luke Bratton, that's an exceptional signing for a club like MacArthur. That base general that sits at the bottom of the midfield that can dictate the tempo of play. You've got Marin Jakalic, who we know can score goals in the A-League. You've got Harry Sawyer, who equaled the Golden Boot in NPL Victoria, offers a very different profile to Jermaine. I believe they could play up top together quite well in a 4-4-2 kind of setup. You know, you got Chris Economides, who is absolutely blown the league away at times in his career, and he's been stunted at Melbourne Victory due to form and injury and whatnot under Popovich in the last few years. So they've picked up all these players falling out of other clubs. I think they have a really solid base, and the one thing you're going to get with Stovsky is just calmness and composure and solidity and consistency, right? And that, I think, transfers a lot into the way they play. They're okay sitting back off the ball. They don't buckle under the pressure very often. They know how to see out games, and I think they're going to frustrate people a lot, Poletti. And they have enough pieces, as I said, that they've picked up from other clubs to really frustrate some teams. I think that's the word I keep coming back to. And I think, maybe finals is probably what their target should be. I know Philip Curto came out and said up to the Cup final that they've talked internally about wanting to go on and win everything. Do you think that's a realistic possibility for them?
I think if everything goes right, it certainly is, but that's a big stretch to sort of say that everything's going to go right. They did struggle a little bit in the Cup towards the back end, a couple of 1-0 victories that you didn't really see the best of MacArthur with, and they had to rely a lot on Philip Curto. And sometimes goalkeepers are just going to have an off day, and if he's having an off day for whatever reason, instead of a 1-0 victory, that could result in a 3-0 or a 4-0 loss. So it's very hard to...
But is that a positive, though, that they can win in different ways?
No, and I think it is. I think, and we talked about it, they could play 2 up top, could play 1 up top, 3-4-3, a 4-3-3, a 4-4-2. Like, they have such a wide variety of personnel now that, being able to be very... very reactive with how they set up their personnel based on the opposition is going to be a good thing. But I just think so much has to go right based on what we've seen so far in pre-season for MacArthur throughout their Cup run, that I don't know, despite the advantages, whether or not they have it in them. I'd like to believe they do. And, maybe if it's only 90% right, then they can pull it off instead of it needing to be 100% right all the way through. Like I said, I'm very fascinated to watch them this season. I think they'll be an exciting watch, albeit frustrating for a lot of opposition fans, and possibly at times for some of their own fans. Like, you could be in a situation where, it's like that game against Oakley where, they go up 1-0 and then they sit back for the next 90 minutes and it's save after save after save from Philip Curto that gets them through to the next round. So it's going to be a very interesting season for MacArthur.
It's one of those things as well. I don't know, maybe you can enlighten me on this, but it seems like there's a different vibe around MacArthur at the moment. Obviously, they've been through all this stuff that you spoke about at the start with the legal issues, and that sort of put a dampener on things. But winning this second cup, it does sort of feel like there's a different vibe there compared to, especially that first triumph under Dwight York, where obviously then the wheels fell off only a few months later. It does feel like it's a bit more stable and a bit more solid. And as Lockie said, Curto's already come out and said, look, we think we can win it all, which you've mentioned, is a bit ambitious. But yeah, is the vibe a little bit different over there at the moment? Are the fans perhaps a little bit more excited than they have been in the past?
I think it is. I think there's real expectation now for MacArthur. And I think a lot of that, in terms of the different vibe that's coming from the side, I think a lot more of it has to do with the player departures than anyone at the club might let on. I think, having such a scandal rock the club, it sort of forced everyone to come together and sort of, band with it as, okay, this has happened. Let's not let it affect everything and everyone, going forward. And so I think, just having that mentality of being able to bond together, having to replace some players by force has very much allowed them to reshape the squad, I'd say, because, previously everything has run through Ulysses Avila in the midfield. Even with Jermaine last season, everything was running through Davia. He was very much the engine of the squad. And now, Davia has been injured, was injured, and now, gone from the club. So having to find that new identity, having to find that new midfield, or just that new engine where everything runs through, definitely leads to a different vibe because it's someone else who's essentially controlling how the side plays on the pitch, as opposed, and that's just obviously going to bring some change with it.
I have a feeling that this is going to be Stovsky's breakout season for some reason, because, for example, with the Socceroos job, there was reports that, John Aloisi was a potential candidate. But when I look at Stovsky, I know that he still needs a bit more experience under his belt. But someone alluded to it before about his calmness and the way he gets his message across the group. Even I was at that press conference for the Cup final, and the way he just conducts himself is really, really impressive. The way he speaks, and I imagine that obviously it's the same when he talks to his players as well. I just feel as though, I don't know if you have the same view, Poletti, but this could be a season where people take notice of Stovsky as a really top quality coach.
So I had this discussion on Twitter with someone, and I think it was during the Cup final, where talking about Stovsky being underrated as a coach, and so I put the suggestion out there that I think a lot of people underrate him because he's at MacArthur, because amongst a lot of A-League fans, MacArthur still has a reputation of very much being an unwanted side. Crowds are improving, but still low crowds by comparison to almost every other side in the league. Just a, for lack of a better term, stigma that comes with MacArthur. I think that you've got, very much he's being underrated simply because of where he is. So I do agree that this could very much be a breakout season for him if, MacArthur can very much continue to build on what they did last year. That, we could see Stovsky's a good coach. I think Socceroos' job contention is probably a bit too far of a stretch, just because I don't quite think that his profile as a coach suits him to international football. I think he's very much one of these coaches that needs to be there day in, day out, working with the side to get the best out of them.
Yeah. Very interesting. All right, there you go. There are our 3 A-League men's previews to kick off, 4 episodes, 2 weeks to lead up of the season. Let us know what you think. What are your expectations for all these teams? Wellington, Adelaide, MacArthur. It's an interesting bunch, both, all of them with reasons for optimism. We hope that optimism can carry through to Tony Popovich, who is named his squad for the Socceroos to take on China and Japan in the international window. He's been forced to make a couple of changes, Christian, since it was announced on Friday. We all rejoiced at the return of Massimo Luongo to the national team setup. Unfortunately, he has had to be withdrawn due to injury, which is extremely unfortunate. Connor Metcalf comes in. Connor Metcalf has also been excluded due to injury. That's the second player. And they will be replaced by Patrick Yazbek and Luke Bratton, who we just talked about for MacArthur as well, who is now in line for his first ever Socceroos cap, which kind of sounds weird to say. Such an ever-present player in A-League domestic football. He has received a call-up from the Socceroos before, but not a cap to his name.
It reminds me a bit of Lee Broxham, doesn't it? Where he's such a stalwart of the league, but you feel as though he deserves a cap, but he's so close but yet so far. And that's the same with Luke Bratton, I think. But he definitely does deserve the call-up because, throughout the years, like you touched on, this is a great pickup from MacArthur. And we don't expect him to play. It's a 26-man squad, but you never know. Popovich might pull out a few ideas or a few tricks to I guess, stifle China and Japan in that sense. But yeah, the loss of Massimo Luongo was obviously a bit of a blow. We're all looking forward to seeing him back in action, obviously announcing coming out of retirement. And Conor MacArthur as well with the, yes, we don't want him to be missing out, but I think we do have depth in that department where Australia won't be impacted too much in that respect. So yeah, we've said it from the get-go. This is a must 3 points for Popovich here against China, because otherwise, yeah, Australia really, really on the back foot, and heading into that Japan game away from home, it's a really scary proposition to be going there, traveling to Japan with what essentially maybe 1 or 2 points out of a possible 9. It's scary.
There are plenty of talking points in this squad. Obviously, there is a big Melbourne Victory presence. Jason Guerrier, 1 cap as well, received his recall, as well as Daniel Azani and Nishan Valupale for his first appearance in the senior national team setup. A few players returning from injury: Riley McGree, Geordie Boss, Aiden Hrustic, which is exceptional to see. Perhaps 1 or 2 surprise absences, given especially that it is, as you say, Christian, a larger 26-man squad. If you want to listen to us break down the full squad in detail, we've got a 20-minute or so conversation that is up on the Round Ball Australia YouTube channel that we published immediately after the announcement last Friday. So if you want to hear us go into more detail on it, you can look at it over there. But we're going to talk about the replacements a little bit, because Patrick Yazbek Poletti, he has been in the news recently. He was suspended for a couple of games in the MLS for using a homophobic slur. It was originally thought that was perhaps a little bit more of a friendly Australian see you next Tuesday. That was not the case. It turns out it has been a little more serious than that. And obviously, this happened a month or so ago, and now he's receiving a Socceroos caller.
Yeah. I know we sort of teased the rant at the start, but I don't know. What are we doing here? Like, this should not be happening. And this is not anything against Patrick Yazbek as a player. He's a good player. There's a reason that Tony Popovich has selected him to play for the Socceroos. But, we're in a time in life where, we know all the negatives that come from using this outdated language, that come from all these sorts of things. And, I don't hide the fact that I'm a queer person. Everyone knows that. I'm very loud and proud about who I am. And this is just a kick in the guts, right? This is one of those things where he's used a homophobic slur in a match, and I remember reading once, and I said I can't credit the person who I read it from, and my sincerest apologies to them, but you look at to someone using such a word, right, in a competitive contest where tensions are high, you're sort of running on adrenaline at different points. You don't necessarily have the critical capabilities to, give things a lot of thought. It's sort of very much, okay, we're on the move. Let's go. What do you know? What's your muscle reflexes, right? And the brain is a muscle in that respect. And so in such a high-paced competitive environment, that word's at the front of your mind, that you think to use that in an environment where you're basically running on instinct. How often, does he use that word? If that's front of mind for him to use in such a high intense situation, that says a lot. And so, to then go through a suspension, serve your suspension, come back, play, whatever, that's fine. You serve a suspension. The league obviously said 2 games was enough. You can argue the merits of that if you want, but 2 games is 2 games. Come back, play for your club, but to then be rewarded with a Socceroos call-up, a privilege to play for your country. So Tony Popovich in his initial press conference talked about, the importance of the Socceroos jersey, that, when he was asked about Mitch Langerak and Mas Luongo, that he wasn't going to try and sell the squad to anyone, that if they wanted to play, they needed to make themselves available. essentially saying it's a privilege here, not a right. And he sort of hinted that, there were going to be some tough decisions with his squad selection, pending availabilities. Because it is a privilege, no one's guaranteed their spot. To then reward it to someone who's, just so recently, is 2 months removed from what is such a horrid act, that just does not sit right with me. And I very much want to know the logic behind Tony Popovic's decision. Was this taken into account? And if it wasn't, why was that not taken into account?
So let me ask you a question, because I think we should have this conversation, right? Generally, where I would kind of sit on this personally is that, from what I'm aware of, Patrick Gesbeck does not have a history of this. This is the first time he's at least been reported and served a suspension. He's been suspended by the MLS. He's served that suspension. Part of that has been some kind of education and rehabilitation process. If that is not enough to then say, you should be able to go and play back in the MLS and you can be selected for your national team. I know that wasn't a suspension as part of it, but what for you would be a satisfactory process to return to the national team? Because surely you can't say that just one incident, if we have a repeat pattern, then we can have that conversation, but just one incident shouldn't rule you out of ever playing for your national team again, right?
No, and I'm certainly not saying that. I'm certainly not saying he should, be sent off to live in the hills and, his is a dirty name. We don't mention that around this part when it comes to Socceroos selection. I'm certainly not saying that. I just think 2 months is just such a short period of time since it happened. I think, had we maybe revisited this conversation in 6 months after it happened or a year after it happened, I think that would be a fairer time to look at it. Time has passed. Clearly, he's had more time, to go through, this education stuff that, as part of his suspension and whatnot. I just think with it being so close to the incident is not enough. I think, after November, the next window's in March, is it, off the top of my head? So that's 9 months down the road. That's a fine timeline, I think. For me, I just think the fact that it's happened so close to the incident, this was going on while Graham Arnold was still coach, and we know how recently, that departure has happened. So I think we just with how close the timelines are, that I just think it's a little bit too soon.
Okay. Yep. Fair point. Well made. Looking ahead to the game against Adelaide, Jacob, most of the squad are over there. I think about 15 were there for Popovic's first training session on Monday afternoon. The rest will come in Tuesday, Wednesday, as we look towards China on Thursday night. You're going to be in there in the box covering the game for Roundball Australia. What are you hoping to see out of the game in terms of, have you got any selections in mind that you want to see, even just how they play as well?
Fill it with all the South Australian boys. No,
Every single one of them. There's like 7 or something, isn't there?
There's definitely the expectation it's going to happen. In Adelaide Airport, I've recently just been going through there on Thursday afternoon. I left Sunday evening, came back, and there's these massive Socceroos murals everywhere. But it's not just like the whole squad. They've cherry picked out the Adelaide boys and put them onto it. And there's, cardboard cutouts of Craig Goodwin and stuff around the place to take photos with. It's like, I think there's definitely a bit of an expectation that, this is almost sort of an Adelaide team in a way, right? Because you said, Lockie, I think it is 7 South Australian, originating from South Australian players, in the squad. So it's sort of almost a homecoming in that regard. So I would like to see, as much of a presence of Adelaide boys as possible, especially considering that, look, the Socceroos haven't played here for a long, long time. And, who knows when the next opportunity for that is going to be, and, how many of these players are going to be in the squad at that point as well. But obviously the main thing is that we want to see a win and we want to see some good, solid football. And look, while Christian put out a good piece about what can we expect to see from Tony Popovic's Socceroos side, in terms of sort of the tactics. And, in possession, things are going to look very similar. But I think that, I don't think anybody necessarily had a gripe with when Graham Arnold was getting results playing this sort of football. It was when he started to not get results. So it's about the efficiency of how it all works when it's on the pitch. Do the players have good link up? Are they on the same page? And, are they on the same page as the coach as well? And I think that's sort of what started to disappear a little bit towards the end of Arnie's I was about to say reign there. He wasn't king. It was, but during his tenure, I think that Tony Popovich coming in, he's the sort of person who, I don't know, at least to me, he's always seemed like somebody who can get players focused on the game. And, we saw that with the victory last season where, yes, they went through that period where they did struggle and they had a lot of draws, but were then able to turn that around and come in really strong at the end of the season and play some really, really good football. I really want to see the same again for the Socceroos. We mentioned already the returns of McGree and Christich, which is going to be huge because the midfield has been probably the weak link for the side, especially when you're playing that three of Irvine, Metcalf, and was it O'Neill? It just sort of seemed like you've got players who are all very similar there. So while McGree and Christich probably won't start just simply because it is their return, it would be a bit of a rush perhaps to put them straight into the starting 11. There's that option there that there are these players that can come off the bench and sort of change things up in the centre of the park. And I mean, Poletti was just singing the praises of Luke Bratton, and we're not expecting him to probably feature at all. But again, you've got another option there of a decent workhorse sort of midfield player who can perhaps change things a little bit and change the composition of the squad. So I'm just really hoping to see a return to some decent, efficient, effective, controlled football, because it is a game that the Socceroos have to win. Like, it's as simple as that. It's a must-win game, and if they don't, then there I think are going to be bigger questions asked about the setup of the national team as a whole, because it's been sort of a failure so far this qualifying window, and this is a chance to right that and try and get back on the right track. And look, we can't be critical of Popovich yet because they haven't played a game, and I think it would be a bit too soon to be critical right after the first full 90 that he gets with the squad. But I am, at least hoping to see a return to form, because we know that this is a solid side, and we know what these players can do. It's about making sure that they're enabled to be able to do that, and perhaps a change of coach is exactly what that will do.
And you talked about McGree and those types, and maybe it would be a bit quick to bring them in. But of course, at least from Popovich's perspective, this is a completely clean slate. It's fresh.
Yeah.
You're not bringing anyone in. You're just starting someone.
It's a completely new thing. You've just hit new, delete new. Yeah. It's not a copy paste.
And it won't be the exact same for the players, but a new coach does offer the new start if you want to take it. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see. If you want to watch the game along with us and talk some football while we do, we're going to be live streaming both of these Socceroos fixtures over on YouTube as well. So kickoff 8:10, I believe, Eastern time for this China game on Thursday night. We'll be live just after 8 o'clock. We hope to see you there. Finally, for tonight, Poletti, Melbourne City have won their first ever game in the AFC Women's Champions League. We had Matt Olsen on the podcast last week. He promised us a little bit of a heftier margin than 2-1 win for Melbourne City over Bam Katoon, but they got the 3 points, which is, of course, the most important thing. First half goals from Rihanna Policina and Mariana Speckmeyer got the job done, and Olympico from Katoon made the scoreline look a little bit tighter than perhaps what would have been comfortable. But yes, a win for Melbourne City in the first ever outing in the Champions League.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing, right? Is that it's 3 points. I very much I looked at this game and I thought, I've seen this Melbourne City side before. It's almost just the way that they were set up as sort of just very much had that striking resemblance of Dario ball, where dominate possession, drive through the midfield, and just sort of control the game that way, get off shots. But, like we saw, that wasn't always successful last season. And I say that despite the fact we know they won the Premier's play. There were a couple of games last season where it almost just looked like, okay, when is this sort of dominate possession, get shots off, going to catch up to them if they don't find their way behind the goalkeeper and, into the net. and it sort of never really caught up with them last season outside of, one game against the Wanderers and like a couple of others here or there. So they're very deliberately chosen Matriciani to come in part, I'm assuming because of the style they played. Now, to be fair, it is one game, and this could very much just be they knew that Bam Katoon were going to sit back, they were going to sit deep, like a lot of sides do, and try to frustrate, the more talented opposition, shall we say, and that's not to, discredit Bam Katoon in any way, shape, or form. It's just a reality of how, we see a lot of these sides set up. So could that change as both the Champions League and the A-League women's season roll around? It could, and I'm certainly excited for it. But we know that despite player departures, that they can still play a very dominant possession-based game and do so quite successfully. I'm very excited to see how this competition continues. I would expect Melbourne City to make the quarterfinals and host the quarterfinal. And so I might have to make a trip to Melbourne when that happens. But the biggest frustration I thought from this game was the broadcast itself. So they've clearly gone, all out with this production quality to make it a spectacle, to give the tournament the respect that it deserves, compared to broadcasts that we've seen in the past. Sydney FC last season when they were in Uzbekistan. But then they didn't have commentary. And it's like, why would you go to all that effort with your production quality to then just not have commentators? It's not like it's hard to find commentators. It's not like there wouldn't have been any reasonably readily available if the AFC had put just a little bit of effort into it. So I think you very much have to question the AFC there and, what is actually going on, because you could not imagine a men's game would not have commentary on it at a Champions League level, whether that be the ACL Elite or ACL 2. So I just very much an annoyance, and I don't think it'll be corrected throughout the group stage. I'm hoping that by the time the quarterfinals roll around and they get into the central hub at the end of the tournament, that it will be corrected. But yeah, other than that, great performance from Melbourne City. I very much enjoyed watching it, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing how they go throughout the rest of the group.
And it's just another thing to add as well to the growing list of examples of, I suppose, the AFC not really treating women's football with the respect that it deserves. Because I think it was only a couple of weeks ago that we were chatting about something else where they were perhaps sort of neglecting the competition. So yeah, it's a bit of a bit disappointing to see that it's continuing despite the growth of the game. So yeah, no, spot on there, Poletti.
No, it absolutely is, and I'm very much hopeful that the AFC fixes it and fixes it soon.
All right. Well, this podcast is now ticking close to the 80-minute mark. Apparently, that's the twilight zone over here because we're kind of losing our heads a little bit. Let's soldier on. Just a few minutes to go. Before we finish up, of course, as we're getting closer to the A-League season, a lot of your favourite podcasts and other media shows are about to make their return as well. A-League Off Air, Danny McBreen and Robbie Thompson, they had their first episode. As I said earlier, I listened to Football Friends this morning with Ben Garuccio and Stefan Mork. I know the Global Game is back on Tuesday as well. All these different platforms, these mostly independent people that are just producing content around the A-League. It's really great to see. The more the merrier. Glad to have a lot of my favourite listeners back on my rotation, Christian. And there seems to be more than ever as well in terms of independent people making content around the league. So good to see, really excited, and hopefully all the best for everyone as they begin to make their returns.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like there's a bit of a market now, isn't there, where people are tapping into to say, we just want to promote football. There's so much conversation to be had. I know the A-League recently has been sort of one of its low points in terms of financially, but this is more of a reason why more people should get involved and start this discussion and just make it an entertaining product. We've seen the new show on, I think it was on Paramount Plus, I think Tara Russian and who's the other one? Tara Russian.
Scott McKinnon.
Yeah, so even the new show now that's airing for the new season, that's just great content, to have something different. besides, I think someone mentioned it on the last podcast or the previous one where, it's not as if you're watching the games on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, then you've got to wait the whole week until some more football content. There's a bit of everything during the week. And these podcasts as well that you mentioned, Lockie, and there's more out there, of course, that we haven't mentioned. They just feed into your week and they build up to the anticipation for the start of a Friday fixture or what have you. So, the more the merrier, like you said, Lockie.
And just before we sign off, I do want to give a shout out to Robbie and to Daniel at A-League Off Air. They very much opened up their last episode talking about how, there might be some changes. And they talked about, just in the introduction, sort of like, things don't always stay the same in the second season, talking about how the F1 has asked their drivers not to swear and sort of hinted that perhaps that they might be following suit, and then just went straight back to the classics. And it was just like, it was such a relief. I thought, no, just don't do this to me. Don't do this to me. And then it just came right back to it. So shout out to both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. And as I said, it's mostly people who are just driven by a love for the game. They want to push it forward. So get around them, support them just like you do us. We appreciate that we're part of your rotation as well. We hope you've enjoyed our off-season coverage, of course. But yeah, back into the thick of the A-League season very shortly. We cannot wait. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast, a very chunky one. Christian Montegan, we got through it just. Honestly,
if we survive a few more minutes, I don't think we would be able to hack it.
Poletti, I hope Sam Purr's improving on her keepy-ups in the background over there.
I'm pretty sure it was actually Alex Kidiak who was going with the KP-ups, not Sam Purr. But she seems to be improving. Maybe if she can just restrict it to when we're not recording podcasts, that would be great.
That would be nice. Jacob Stevens as well, thank you.
Thanks, Lucky. It started out with such great promise, didn't it, this episode? And then by the end, it was just chaos. But
to be
we need a bit of banter in here as well.
Yeah, we wanted positivity and optimism. I think that's what we got.
That's what happens when you change things.
Well, at least Alex Kidiak gave us some positivity.
Oh, God. All right, that is it's officially time to sign off. We will be back to talk about the Socceroos and give you part 2 of our A-League men's preview as well. Thank you all very much for listening. We'll see you then. Goodbye.